As part of Smart Cities initiative of celebrating the 75th anniversary of Indian independence, they had freedom to walk, freedom to cycle. And Chennai came first in cycling and second in walking, and that's purely to the effort of the various cyclists and walkers in the city, runners, walkers, cycling. So there's a lot of groups here who are into all that, and it's pretty heartening that in a humid, hot city where people say nobody walks, nobody cycles, we actually come first. So it's a very nice morale booster, but we have a long way to go, in terms of cycling and all that. See, I think before we focus too much on cycling, we need to step back and look at the city. We are a city of 10 million people. Think of this as Hong Kong, think of this as Singapore, Shanghai, New York, Paris and all that. We can't simply focus on cycling, right? Because the problem is most of the road space is occupied by car. And unless you remove those cars, you can't get to proper other infrastructure, because there'll always be question of how can you give a cycle track when there's so many cars on the road. Then we'll have to look at how do we increase public transport so that people who are going 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers to work, shopping, etc., find it very convenient to reach place and then go about their life like in any other good big city. And then cycling becomes one important part of the many modes of transport, buses, metro rail, walking, etc. Now there are some massive projects in the pipeline, and some already happen, where there's pedestrian plaza and various footpaths being done across the city. There's also the Tamil Nadu government has gotten into this mega program called the Chennai City Partnership. If you're going to do a cycle track here, how much car has to go away, how many buses has to be there to absorb those car passengers. So it is a much more integrated, much more complex way of planning, and then individual departments end up implementing it. So those kinds of some fundamental things are moving forward. A more integrated approach of planning and all is actually happening in Chennai. So I think I'm very hopeful in terms of Chennai. In the next few years, we should start seeing quite a bit of infrastructure happening. But also, we have something called Smart Bike, which is a bike sharing system, one of the rare things in India. We were one of the first to do it. And that's even with COVID it went down a little bit, but it's started taking off again. So we always request citizens to start using smart bikes because it connects the metro rail station, bus depots, shopping places and colleges and so on. So I think we've done quite a bit of strategic pieces. Now we need to start scaling. It's a concerted effort by Tamil Nadu government where you need carrot and stick, right? So, like I said, KUMTA has been formed. That's Chennai Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority is formed. The amendments are coming. They already started hiring experts to do the planning and so on. Then corporation has started doing Mega Street and so on and so forth. There's a lot of work going on in MTC. Metro Rail has been working with various agencies to start doing, let's say 200 meters, 300 meters, how do we improve walkability and cyclability to the metro rail station or a bus depot and so on. Those are the carrots, the more buses, more AC buses and cycle tracks and so on. At the same time, there are some sticks every city uses. So for example, parking management. The worst thing you can do against anti-public transport is free parking, right? So Chennai is one of the first cities to implement a very complicated, it's not easy to do just parking, because nobody in the world, not just Chennai, but nobody in the world wants to give money for parking. So that system is already functioning in Chennai and it needs to scale. A lot more needs to happen. Then for example, there's a mega project happening called the Intelligent Transportation System. So this will end up not only helping people move better, so it'll be better for fuel saving, less congestion, less congestion, pollution due to congestion and so on. But also cutting, red light cutting, catching people who cut red light, catching people who speed too much. So those kinds of pressure needs to be there on the car drivers, so that if you're driving a car, you drive properly and so on. But there also has to be a cost to it, that is parking management fees and so on and so forth. So both these mega pieces need to fall in place in any of these big cities for all these different pieces to happen. So you can't simply tell people go use buses and nobody's going to bother, because then people will complain that the buses are not good, buses are not AC. How can I, in this humid city, how can I use a bus, and so on and so forth. People prefer door-to-door car, AC car, and so on and so forth. So I think we need to do all these different pieces and integrate it in a very holistic manner for people to start discovering public transport. Also start pushing people transport. So for example, when metro rail is very convenient, people automatically start saying, okay, why do I need to drive all the way, get stuck in congestion, when I can just sit in a metro rail and happily go somewhere. Or AC bus, for example. I've seen rich and poor get into an AC bus because people want convenience, right? So it's going to take a lot of effort on the city, and I think some of those things have already started, but it's going to take a lot of effort on the part of the city and government to be able to push more people into public transport. Tamil Nadu government, I think one of the first cities, the first states in the country to take climate change very seriously. They've announced climate change policies, and they're now working at different levels to figure out how do we deal with climate change, how do we move towards more sustainable models of energy, and so on and so forth. So that is one very good guidance we're getting from the state government. Plus, of course, the city itself, for example, C40, ITDP, people like Greenpeace and others, because Chennai is a little more friendly place to work for NGOs. So a lot of these NGOs have been working for a long time in Chennai. So C40, for example, as we speak, they already did a greenhouse gas emission benchmarking and so on. Now they are preparing a climate action plan, right? So from that will come what each department should be doing, what should MTC do, what should public do, what should stormwater drain people do, and so on. Similarly, as part of the Chennai City Partnership, the World Bank funded Tamil Nadu government's project, there is urban resilience study going on. So if something good or bad happens, how does MTC react to it? How does various departments react to it? What are the alternate routes for mobility? How does Metro cope with it, and so on? So there are a lot of those pieces of studies, and not just simply study for the sake of study, but infrastructure and services from those studies. So how do we improve infrastructure to deal with climate change? How do we move towards more sustainable models of green energy, and so on and so forth? But even if there is climate change anyway going to happen, how do we deal with it? So we need to deal with both pieces. So a lot of efforts are happening in the city, and we don't have a choice. So if you're going to take climate change seriously, obviously we need to move towards electric buses, or better public transport, and more green space, more tree cover, and so on and so forth. All these things are happening in maybe small pieces in Chennai, and like I said, we are in the process of scaling. The Tamil Nadu government and various departments in the process of scaling. Chennai Corporation itself is scaling. So for example, Miyawaki Forest, water body restoration. Chennai Corporation is one of the leading corporations in the country. Hundreds of water bodies have been restored. Many acres of foresting has been done in the city. So once you do something, it's easy to replicate, right? So all that is happening. And then, for example, MTC bus is now procuring hundreds of electric buses. It's not an easy process, because you have a complete system has to change from charging to everything else. So that's happening. I think industry department is taking electric vehicles very, very seriously to see how can we switch to electric vehicles, and so on and so forth. So quite a bit of efforts going on. So one, we have to take it very seriously. So simply doing a little bit of cycle track here, or one footpath there, 10 AC bus and all is not going to make a difference in a city like Chennai, right? When we were doing the pedestrian plaza, a lot of people are opposed to it, saying that why you're ruining the road, hardly cars can go through, how can you take away road space and give for footpath, right? Today that's one of the most popular places in the city. All kinds of people, rich and poor, old and young, go hang out there. Even during COVID, people used to go up and down walking and so on. So very popular. Many elected representatives want a plaza in their constituency. Many shopkeepers are saying, how come you're doing only in T Nagar? Why not do it in front of my shop or whatever? So people in India have seen YouTube videos or traveled abroad. We have seen what quality of life looks like. If Singapore can shift people into public transport, But they have done 100 things, 1,000 things to make that happen. It's not simply buying 2 buses and 5 footpaths, right? They do many different things. Transit-oriented development, policy changes, how do we ensure that when we build a metro rail, bus is integrated, share auto is integrated, walking is integrated, cyclists, it's not simply one metro rail station. And then wondering why nobody's using metro rail. Same thing with buses, same thing with footpath. So I think we need to take all these things very, very seriously and do a lot of fundamental research to make sure that we understand what we're doing, right? The idea is quality of life, and then we work backward. If there's a school, if London has done so many meters, there is zero pollution or very minimal pollution. Then you work backwards to say, how do I make that happen? How does the city make that happen? Is it more buses? Is it more walking? What pollution can you reduce so that children there are healthy? And so on. We need to do a concerted effort, systematic effort to be able to do this. So from a public point of view, for example, corporation is now working with a lot of institutions, Rotaries and foundations and so on, to bring in CSR. So it could be a small club somewhere saying, okay, I want to plant 100 trees. It could be somebody saying, I want to do artwork, I want to restore this water body, or whatever it may be, right? A lot of sustainable kind of things, taking up schools and so on and so forth. Chennai Corporation is actually working with lots of institutions to say, you bring in the money, government can put in some money, and let's scale more good work. So public can start getting involved in the city in those ways. You take your own neighborhoods and try to see how do you reduce pollution there, how do you reduce car traffic there so children can play on the road. You don't see any child playing on the road nowadays. Everybody is sitting inside the house and watching TV. Then we worry about obesity, then we worry about diabetics. It's all connected. It's not just one or two pieces. So COVID, diabetics, comorbidity, health, lifestyle, it always comes back to nobody's walking, nobody's cycling, nobody's playing on the road. So I think we need to take all this seriously and then think from our own road perspective, our own neighborhood perspective, and obviously from a city and country and world perspective. But let's start at least with what we can do so that we can, if everybody does their piece, it adds to a better level.